welcome everybody to the Main Street walking tour. We're calling it the 19 highlights of Main Street. The reason for the 19 is because the center had a promotion a few months ago to commemorate the 19th anniversary of this museum. It was opened in 1998, so they said, well, think of some gimmick that has something to do with 19. So I came up with 19 highlights, and we're not going to count them as we go down the street. If you want to keep scoring, you're welcome to do so.
I said it was Susan, it was you.
What's that?
I said it was Susan, it was you.
That's right, yeah. My name is John Mahoney. I'm a docent here at the museum, and I'll explain to you in a moment that I do have some ties to Salinas. To start with, I'd like to. Oh, and let me tell you where we're going, what our strategy is. Once we leave here, we're going to walk down as far as 2 blocks, stopping along the way on the right-hand side of the street, and then we'll cross at the signal and come back up on this side of the street. And it's 12:22 right now. I'm an hour, and of course, if you feel like you need to leave early, feel free to do so. You can just drop out. There's no problem. Feelings won't be hurt. And of course, as we go along, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to throw in highlights, some information about some of the buildings. This is Salinas. This is the home of John Steinbeck. We have to have a little Steinbeck in there, so we'll include that. I'm a native of Salinas. I grew up in this town. I've got a few, I'll throw in a few of my own personal recollections just to spice it up a little bit. And as I say, we welcome your questions, and that can lead to further discussion on things. Let's start. I think this is a fascinating factoid that I don't think too many people know about. This museum has a John Steinbeck link to it. And I only found this out a little over a year ago. But way back in the day, in 1888, John Steinbeck's grandfather, Samuel Hamilton, and by the way, he and his wife and family were featured in East of Eden. They owned a slice of land right down here, roughly between Salinas Street and Central Avenue and Main Street. And in 1888, the city of Salinas decided it wanted some of that land. And so they exercised their right of eminent domain. And so they had a court hearing here in Salinas. A 9-member jury was appointed to settle the compensation so that Mr. Hamilton would be fairly reimbursed for the value of his property. I read the court results, and it is very confusing. So I'm sure the logical question you have is, well, how much money did Mr. Hamilton get? And I really can't tell you, but he was compensated fairly. The part that's of interest to me is one of the juror members was a man by the name of John D. Kaler. John D. Kaler, as it turns out, was my great-grandfather.
Oh!
So that's my link to Salinas. Is there anybody here who can top that? If so,
No.
take over. All right, so anyway, I do have deep links to Salinas. We're going to head down now to in front of the Taylor Building, and this is without question the most important locale, not only of Main Street, but for the entire city of Salinas. I'll tell you why when we get down there.
Wow.
This is where it all began. It began for Salinas at this spot sometime around in the late 1860s. There was a man by the name of Deacon Elias Howe, who, by the way, was, I believe, the grandson of the inventor Elias Howe, and he invented the sewing machine way back in time. And he wanted to establish a halfway house that would span Monterey and an area about 3 or 4 miles east of here, out in what we call the Natividad. So he loaded up this truck of lumber. He's going to build this sort of little hotel, little place for stagecoach stops. And he's coming along right along this area here, which bordered a slough. Salinas was an area of sloughs at this time. He gets to this point, and all of a sudden the wheel on his wagon falls off. The whole load of lumber tips over, and here he is. He's got this whole load of lumber. So he thinks it over for a few minutes and says, "What the heck? Why should I try and fix the wagon and load it back up and go out to the divot? I'll build my halfway house right here." That's what he did. And as you might expect, once the halfway house came up and we had stagecoaches stopping here, we started to get the beginnings of a settlement. And, by the way, the name of the first hotel for Salinas was the American Hotel. And so he owned this hotel for about 5 years. And then a man by the name of Carlisle Abbott came along in 1873, and Abbott said, "I'd like to buy the property," and he did. And so he built, he took the American house and had it moved to the back and built his own hotel, which was 126 feet wide and 90 feet deep. He installed asphalt sidewalks in front of the hotel and made it a really neat looking hotel. I have a picture of it here, and I'll show it to you, then we'll pass it around. So this was a picture of the hotel, and he aptly named it after himself, the Abbott House. Okay, and the Abbott House was very convenient because the train depot was only a stone's throw from here. So people that were stopping in Salinas on the train and wanted to stay here would come to the Abbott House. The Abbott House is mentioned prominently in John Steinbeck's book, East of Eden. There's one, I'll mention one little highlight from it. The man, Abbott Trask, allegedly lived over just one block over. There's a story about him on a very cold, rainy day in Salinas. He wasn't feeling very well. He had sort of a cold. So he comes to the Abbott House and goes into the bar, and the bartender says, "You don't look so good, and I've got just the remedy for you." And so he mixed him a hot toddy, and Mr. Trask drank the hot toddy, and the bartender says, "You look a lot better, but I think you need one more. Oh, and by the way, I'll have one with you." So that's the story. That's right out of Steinbeck's East of Eden. So that was the Abbott House, but it didn't stay the Abbott House forever. Eventually, David Jacks, which a well-known name in California history, he bought the property. He held it for a while. And then, in 1921, two brothers, Mike and George Cominos, bought the hotel. This is in 1921. First thing they did was they closed the hotel down. By the way, this is a picture of the Cominos Hotel. And we'll pass that around. This is the only color picture you're going to see. They closed the hotel down for about a year and a half, and really fixed it up. Put a lot of money into it. They had imported marble fireplaces in every room. They had an elevator, which was unheard of for those times. They built in tobacco shops, a haberdashery shop. They had a beautiful bar with opulent oak. They had brass and chrome spittoons. Spittoons, of course, were very common in those days. And they also had a first-class restaurant. And the restaurant was renowned for its food, for its beautiful china, everything about it. And I can tell you that growing up in Salinas as late as the 1950s, the Cominos Hotel was still known for its excellent food. And I can remember we would come to the Cominos Hotel maybe once or twice a week for Sunday night dinner. My grandmother lived in Salinas. She would come. We all dressed up. We were reminded to be on our best behavior, et cetera, et cetera. So the Cominos Hotel was memorable from that standpoint, a really nice part of Salinas. Here's something you might find a little hard to believe. A lot of famous people stayed at the Cominos Hotel. Would you believe two sitting presidents who actually were president at the time, stayed at the Cominos Hotel? One was Calvin Coolidge, and the other was Herbert Hoover. This would have been in the 1920s. A lot of famous Hollywood people stayed here. You had people like James Cagney, Charlie Chaplin, Laurel Hardy, Hopalong Cassidy, military hero General George Patton stayed here, as well as just lots and lots of other famous people. Governors, every governor from Alvarado and Brown, that would be the father of Governor Jerry Brown. Every single governor stayed here at one time or another. So you're probably saying, why would all these people stay at the Cominos Hotel? Yes, it was a nice hotel, but such famous people. Well, it's very simple. Main Street was part of the El Camino Real. It was part of the main highway system between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And in those days, you did not have bypasses. You had two-lane road, and it was slow traffic. And so if you were traveling, say, from San Francisco to Los Angeles, you might spend pretty much a full day going from San Francisco to Salinas, where you would stop and spend the night. I have a picture here that shows you what Main Street looked like in the I'm guessing this is the 1930s. And you have to remember, just forget that there's a museum, and this was straight through. And the Hotel Franciscan would be right up past where the buildings are right there. It formerly was the Gavilan Hotel, but it became the Franciscan Hotel. So that would be roughly where the garage is. And if you look way down the street, you'll see the sign for the Hotel Jeffrey, and you probably will see a lot of other neat things too. But you can see from looking at the picture, there's a lot of traffic on the street. Salinas was busy because, after all, it was part of the main thoroughfare between San Francisco and Los Angeles. Eventually, the Hotel Cominos, like everything, got old and decrepit, and I won't go into all the details. It suffered some damage in the 1989 earthquake, and they more or less condemned it then. When they finally did tear down the building, they had the wrecking balls out here, and the wrecking balls didn't do much of a job. The hotel was a lot stronger than most people thought. But eventually it was torn down, and for a while, a short time, it was until about 4 or 5 years ago, when the Taylor family, and the Taylor family is the largest agricultural corporation in the Salinas Valley, decided to build here and to establish this as their corporate headquarters. And so the Taylor building opened only, in case you're not aware, just 1 year ago. And you can see the bottom floors have been set aside for retail sales and all. And for a while, things have been kind of slow, but it's picked up. We have a very well-known restaurant from South Salinas, Portobello's, that's moving in, will be opening soon. A gift shop that's opened. We now have Starbucks. If you got Starbucks, what the heck, you've got everything, right? So it's doing very well. As far as the building itself is concerned, it's 100,000 square feet big, contains an underground garage, a fourth floor patio and barbecue area, plus a 50-person lecture hall floor. And we were walking down here, I don't know how many of you have been inside. I know I haven't been. There's always a guard there. I think you have to have special credentials to get in. The second floor is for spaces being rented out for other companies, and I believe Capital Bank is established their headquarters here as well. So that summarizes the history of this area. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I have a question about the picture the photograph that's being passed around. It's looking down, it's looking south.
Looking down there.
Yeah, but so what was there? It looks like it's up. The picture is taken not at street level, but kind of.
What was it?
Jack's department store.
Well, where Jack's department store,
They buried it when they built the Steinbeck Center. They had to dig it all up and then compact the Ellis out slope.
okay, I'm trying to picture how
I never
that's
saw it.
done.
I just know it was buried there.
Was it buried?
Buried.
Why was it buried?
Because they didn't want, I don't know. That's what they did.
But my recollection was that there was nothing that
All I know is where that side is, it was Jack's apartment.
When you say that side, like where
The museum store, that
Okay.
part of the building.
That's interesting,
So-
okay.
That
So Main
general
Street
area. where-
continued.
Oh, yes,
And
it
it's-
did.
And it wasn't Monterey that had Salinas doing the north and south. It was Main Street and south.
Main Street continued.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, this
Yeah.
was Main Street, yeah.
Yeah.
You could go to North Salinas if you kept going
Yes,
this
you
way.
could,
Yes.
exactly. You
Right.
Connect right to it.
Yeah.
There was no north.
If there was,
And then
if
they
there
built
was
the
a
bridge,
North
right?
Salinas. When was the other house?
When was the,
Under the tree, yeah, when was that all built? Any idea?
No idea. They won't.
What's the
I've been alive, it's been there.
Well, the underpass here.
The overpass.
This one out here?
Yeah,
Oh,
it was
no.
built in the 70s. The tan park, was that built in the 70s?
Well, that was fixed up.
That was World War II.
Yeah, right. And that was, that little area has been there.
Yeah.
Of course, they fixed it up for the tan park. Fairly
This is where the California Hotel was.
where the, when it was
California Hotel.
Oh, here. Well, and you mean in the Cominos Hotel or something?
No, these guys had and they come back from competing in the San and had a rip-roaring time and were comparing notes and decided that it would be fun to start something here where they could compete in what they did every day on the ranch. And so they did it in Central Park. They did that for a couple of years. And the Rodeo ground had fallen on hard times. There was no rodeo. Pacific Coast trotting horse track. And in the deed it says that they have to have races there, but they also didn't have any audience there. So they had the Wild West guys go do some things in between races with the rest of the system.
As far as the importance, you bring up a good point. As far as you cannot underestimate the importance of the Cominos Hotel. They had lots of facilities where groups could get together and all the power and so you talk about things like discussion to have, all the big major business decisions, all the changes in agriculture, all of that probably was started and continued.
On the construction, they actually, what didn't fall on the building next door, those photos were fake, but they convinced the city council. And I was over across the street there, the city manager went the very next day. And I said, this is the result of last night's meeting? And he says, yeah, we are cleared, we can tear down everything except the facade. The judge is hearing the facade right now. I have half a thousand here. And right then, somebody came up and said, just sit there and then.
Well, that wrecking ball apparently had a tough time. Didn't come down. Well,
I don't know how easy it was. I just know that they were getting everything except the front.
except the front. Let's head down to the corner. Okay, we're going to stop here at the corner. And you can back here a little bit. I want to show you a few photos, and we pass them around. And this is a photo. We're standing here now, looking down towards Main Street. And I'll just point out a couple of buildings. The building that's here on the corner back, this was before, this would have been the late 1890s, the late 1800s. This was called Ford and Sanborn. It was a general store. And I think it's very popular. And I think it's notable because the 1906 earthquake in San Francisco, the earthquake here in Salinas that day totally destroyed the Ford and Sanborn company. This was the most destructive, the building that was most destroyed, and it was literally just a pile of rubble after the 1906 earthquake. The other buildings on Main Street suffered damage and did need fixing up, and I've read an excerpt. John Steinbeck's father took him on a walk the day after the earthquake, and John, I think, was about 4 years old at the time. And Of course, he was all interested in all the damage, but it wasn't that substantial, and most buildings were able to open within 2 or 3 days after the earthquake, which was quite amazing. They still had work to do. I want to point out one more item here. This is called the Car Tower, and this was the site of the first library in Salinas, and it came as a result of the generosity of Jesse Carr, C-A-R-R. Jesse Carr owned tremendous amounts of land out in the northeast of Salinas.
Looking this way?
That's looking this way, yes. So it would be right down there, right down there. Yeah. And he owned tremendous amounts of land and was very wealthy and also very generous. And he donated $5,000 to the city of Salinas for this library and for the tower, and it was called, there was a clock on it, and it was called the Clock Tower. And I don't know if any of you have read, well, some of you hopefully have read East of Eden, but there's a section in there where Steinbeck describes the weekly walk of Kate. Kate, of course, was the madam at the bordello over there. And he would say he was very precise about times. At 1:30, she would go to this place. At 1:45, she'd go there. And a lot of people think that Steinbeck, the car tower was so well known in Salinas in those days that Steinbeck probably had the car tower time in his mind when he was writing it. It was sort of the timepiece for Main Street, so to speak. Okay, I'll just throw this out. This is another picture, same location, only a little bit later. And this one here, this would be probably the, I don't know, but it's before the car, barely the car, you see a couple of cars in there, probably 1915 or so, something like that. And then I also want to show you 2 more pictures here, and then we'll talk about the Glick Park building here. Now this is a picture of Main Street looking from here up north towards what is today the Steinbeck Center. And this is easy. This, of course, is the Abbott house right here. And way up, I got the wrong one here. Let's see. No, that's correct. Well, I'm just going to have to go over this one. This is looking up towards the north, and of course you'll recognize this building right here. This is called the McDougal Building, and several buildings up, if you look carefully, there's the word Bardin, B-A-R-D-I-N. That was a hotel, a very nice hotel, that basically is located where the parking garage is today, and that later became the Franciscan Hotel. And then on the left side, you will see the Abbott House on the left-hand side. So anyway, feel free to look at that. We are at the Glick Park building right now, and this was the site of the first Bank of Salinas, and the man who organized the first Bank of Salinas is Jesse Carr, who else? Who was a great benefactor of Salinas. This bank was largely suffered severe damage in the 1906 earthquake, and it was reconstructed in 1907 with reinforced concrete. Many years later, it was purchased by Manny Glickbarg, a well-known businessman and a city councilman. What's significant about this building was this was a bank, and there's a little bit of lore about this building. There's a mezzanine level inside. The mezzanine level was the locale where the president of the bank had his desk and office, and he could look down on the main floor of the bank and observe the goings-on. Now this is during the time, remember, when banks were on the gold standard. You had to have basically the value of gold in your vault equal to your assets. So they had a big vault, and it was full of gold. And there was always the worry that somebody might come and steal the gold. So they concocted a plan in case something like that would happen. The plan was they had a secret passageway behind the mezzanine level. So if the president of the bank all of a sudden observed that somebody was holding up the bank, he could sneak down the secret passageway to the floor level and then go underground. They constructed a tunnel out here on Gavilan Street that ran all the way across over to the Glick Park building. And somebody could go under the tunnel, go all the way over to the Glick Park building and go up and get help. And as it turns out, nobody ever tried to hold up the bank. But the question is, what happened to the tunnel? Okay, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that the tunnel was used as a way to get to a speakeasy in Salinas in the 1920s. And the speakeasy was located down there. And I've talked to the man that owns this building, who got his information from the previous owner of the building and the previous owner to that. I've been down into the basement. It certainly is plausible that you could have something like that. It's a large basement. And so for the 1920s, that was a place, and there were probably other speakeasies in Salinas too, I would imagine. But anyway, the tunnel served as an easy access for people that wanted to go.
So does the tunnel still exist?
The tunnels are still there, but they're closed off. And I've talked to a couple of other merchants. I talked to one other merchant who owns a property here on the street. He said, there are numerous tunnels on this street going all over the place. So he didn't seem fazed by it at all. Now, of course, they're closed off today, and I don't think anybody really knows too much about it. But anyway, okay, we're going to go across the street. And
Why don't you look at the calendar and pick a day next week? Maybe later on in the week. Okay.
Okay, this is an important corner also in the history of Salinas. I mentioned to you this was the place, the Ford and Sanborn Company, that was totally destroyed in the 1906 earthquake. But it was rebuilt shortly thereafter, a concrete block. And originally it housed a store called the Hub and Thoroughways, which was sort of an all-around store for being able to get just about anything that you wanted. And it remained that way until 1926. In 1926, Amedeo Giannini, and that could be a familiar name to some of you, he was the founder of the Bank of America. And he decided to build a bank here in Salinas. And for those, some of you may know this, but he was a real trailblazer in the area of banking. Pretty much before him, banks were institutions really for only the very rich, or the corporations and businesses that had a lot of money. And he believed in the common man. He wanted people who were middle class and lower class, who even only had maybe $1 or $2 to deposit, to come to his bank. And as a result, he wanted to be able to make loans to people that were not necessarily the richest. And so the first loan he made here was to a company that was just getting into the artichoke industry, and he advanced a loan to them that helped them build their storage supplies. And he made many other loans to people in agriculture during the 1920s and 30s, and certainly was significant in the growth of agriculture for the Salinas Valley. You might note that I think they've messed around with some of this architecture in the last 6 months or so. This is sort of a Renaissance revival style. You'll notice they have the sailing ship up there, and we can assume that maybe that has something to do with maybe Christopher Columbus's sailing ships to America, and the symbol for the Bank of America, and a lot of got a lot of terracotta up there. At any rate, a very significant building in the history of Salinas. If you go into this store now, way in the back, they still have the vault that was used, and you can see the vault open during the day. Now, I want to point out one more thing about this corner. in the 1920s, you had the Salinas City Bank over there. You had the Bank of America here. You had another bank over here, and you had another bank just one building over from the McDougal building, where the Monterey Brewery is.
Starbucks.
You had 4 banks basically on these 4 corners. In 1924, Salinas had only 7,000 people, and yet you had the 4 banks here plus 3 more. Salinas had 7,000 people, and had 3,000 people in it, and 7 banks. And the question is why? Very simply, Salinas grew tremendously in the 1920s due to the agricultural industry. The invention of the refrigerated car meant that now Salinas growers could not just grow crops for people in the immediate area, they could grow crops for people all over the United States of America. And so suddenly, almost imperceptibly, the economy just took off. So much so that in 1924, Salinas had the highest per capita income of any city in the entire country.
Wow.
And it was attributed primarily to the growth of agriculture.
The highest per capita in the country.
In the United
country?
States. Yeah.
Was it all with one person?
No, but there were a number of really large, a lot of growers who had a lot of money or a lot of land, the Churches and the Hardens and the Merrills and people like that. So, yeah. Okay, we're going to stop down now at the Porter and Irvine store. And this is one of the places where Kate in the East of Eden made her stop. Porter and Irvine's was truly a Salinas institution. The founders of the store opened it in 1888, and it lasted until 1974. Now they had more than one site. This was the site in the 1920s when Steinbeck was growing up, and he had this in mind when he was writing about Kate. But this was called the House of Values. An advertisement in 1908 touted the princess. They sold princess dresses here for only $15, made of durable wool and linen, and 2 pieces for ease of wear.
Princess dresses?
Salinas people through generations shopped here, and I can remember Porter and Irvine's as a child growing up. I went to Sacred Heart School over here, just a few blocks away, and when you went to a broken school, you had to wear a uniform, and so every year. And Porter and Irvine's was the store that carried the uniforms for all the students that went to Sacred Heart School. So I could remember every year around about a week before school started, my mother would drag us down to Porter and Irvine's and say, okay, we got to get our clothing for the upcoming school year. And I always thought it was kind of a sad occasion. Okay, we're going to move on now to the Bell's, what was then Bell's Candy Store. I would imagine if I asked you to think about when you're growing up, was there a place that you went to as a teenager where you could go and gather and just have a good time? And I would imagine you could think of such a place. And if you lived in Salinas in the 1950s, like I did, the place that we went to was Mel's Drive-In down on South Main Street. Yes, I mean that was the place to go and to see and be seen. In John Steinbeck's day in the 1920s, this location here was the place to be. This was Bell's Candy Store. And at Bell's Candy Store, Steinbeck used to come down here as well as all the youth of Salinas. It was an elegant soda shop. They featured homemade ice cream, candy. They had a soda fountain, and John really enjoyed watching the candy being made. There is a quote from the son of the owner who said that, referring to John Steinbeck, he said, "Little John used to come to the candy store, and while he wasn't a bad boy, we had to keep our eye on him." And this is also the place, if you're in East of Eden, does anybody remember that Aaron and Abra, the two teenagers, does anybody remember what they used to sip here at this store? They sipped celery tonics. Anyway, whatever. Okay, we're gonna go down to the corner and take a look at the old Farmer's Merc building, and also known today as the Big Room. Right, yeah. Okay, we're going to stop here. For anybody that lives in Salinas, this is a building that we ask far more questions than we get answers for. It's a building in a constant state of flux. In its glory days, going way back when, it was the site of the Farmers Mercantile. Later on, Montgomery Wards came in, and I can remember when it was Montgomery Wards. And then a very successful man in Salinas by the name of Dick Brune, who had a clothing store and who needed more space, he moved in here and had his clothing store here for several decades. He closed the store down, oh gosh, 15, 20, at least 15 years ago. And the building has basically been sitting here ever since. Some of the brick you see out there was brick that was imported from San Francisco after they had their 1906 earthquake. But about a year and a half ago, the building caught on fire, and it remains in really a state of limbo. Nobody knows what's going to happen to it. The owner of the building is in no hurry to get anything done. It probably is the prime location for all of Main Street, this corner location, and most of us think it's a shame that nothing has been done. So we continue to hope, just like we hoped that something would happen to the Cominos Hotel site, and something did. So fingers crossed, one of these days there will.
Well, he did build one down here.
Pardon?
He did build one corner down there, a big one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Now, before we cross the street, let's talk about the Salinas City Bank building. The Salinas City Bank building was built in the 1930s. We got a lot of Art Deco as far as the architecture was concerned. It was constructed in 1932, and the builders of this building, they wanted it to be the tallest building in Salinas. The problem was there was a 5-story building here called the Jeffrey Hotel that was the tallest. And they were only going to go 5 stories themselves. So they had to figure out what to do. Well, whatever they did was, it worked. Their building was 6 inches taller than the Jeffrey Hotel, so they could proclaim they were the tallest building in Salinas. Now, this building has a lot of history, but I think the single item that impresses me more than anything was what happened in this building during World War II. After the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, as you may either know or have read, the entire Pacific coast was considered to be in great peril, great danger. And so the leaders of Salinas gathered to set up an emergency warning system in case the Japanese would attack Salinas. They were able to get volunteers from Salinas who went up on top of that building with their binoculars or whatever else they had to scan the skies 24 hours a day, 7 days a week during the entire duration of the war. They were up on top of that building, and fortunately there were no attacks, but the people that did that deserve an awful lot of credit. If for no other reason, being up on top of that building with that wind blowing the way it blows every day, and it's living up to its reputation right now. Just take a look at the flag. I've read some stories from people who are up there, and they said it was really, really difficult. It was very cold and very uncomfortable up there. But they did it, and they did it around the clock for the entire duration of the war. Okay, why don't we go? Well, I tell you what. Why don't we stay here? I think it's just as easy. Unfortunately, you don't get the full flavor, but there was a marvelous hotel here called the Jeffrey Hotel. And the Jeffrey Hotel was like the Cominos Hotel, the second major hotel on Main Street. It was built in 1888. And the owner of the hotel, James Jeffrey, was ridiculed because they said, "You're too far away from the train station. Nobody will come to your hotel." But he set up a system of having a horse and buggy constantly going back and forth between the hotel and the station, and it worked out fine. And the hotel was extremely successful. You could buy a weekday dinner at the hotel in 1901 for 25 cents, a complete dinner. This hotel too had many famous people stay in it, but without a doubt, the most famous person who stayed at the Jeffrey Hotel was Marilyn Monroe. And there's an interesting story about Marilyn Monroe related to this. She came in 1948 when nobody had ever heard of her. She was coming to replace an actress whose name was Noreen Nash. And she was coming at the behest of a jeweler here in Salinas. The jeweler's name was Mr. Seidman, who had Hollywood connections and was able to get an actress to come to Salinas to play up his business and generate some publicity for the business. And the idea was that he was going to have a diamond ring giveaway, and all people had to do was to come to the store to sign up for the giveaway. And he wanted to have somebody famous there to lure the people to come. So it turns out it was Marilyn Monroe. But before all of that happened, apparently some of the growers out in the Castroville area got wind of the fact that she was coming, and they were in the process of starting their first ever artichoke festival. So they were able to persuade her to be their artichoke queen.
Their original one broke her arm.
Okay, yeah, well, poor old Marilyn was second fiddle all the way along. Yeah. So they were very nice to her. They picked her up at the train station. They took her out. It was at the old San Lucia Inn. They had a luncheon for her. They gave her a sash, and she did a wonderful job of representing the first artichoke festival for Castroville. The festival still goes on today. It's no longer in Castroville because it got too big. But she was the first one. Then later in the week, she appears at this jewelry deal, and she is there. More than 200 people turned out. She signed their autographs. She was totally cooperative. I'll tell you another story. At one point, this was one of the nights she was here, Mr. Seidman and his wife took her out to dinner at the old Catamatories there where Tarpey's is today. They had dinner out there, and the Seidmans had a little 2-year-old kid. He was flirting with her and everything, and he wanted to sit on her lap during dinner. And Marilyn said, "Sure, you can sit on my lap." So she allowed this boy to sit on her lap while she was eating dinner. She was very, very content and very happy. So she meets all the people at the big jewelry deal. They had the drawing down at the old Vogue Theater. That's where Kinko's is today. That same area that night. And hundreds of people turned out, and Marilyn was there. She picked out the winning ticket, and everybody was really, really impressed with her. About a year ago, when I was doing this tour, one of the people on the tour said, "My grandmother was one of the people who was there," and she said exactly what I was saying and that was Marilyn was the star of the show, and she was the star of the show because she was so natural, so nice, so cooperative. Now there's one more story after this about Marilyn Monroe. That is, she made a lot of friends in this area by here and over on the peninsula. She was here a whole week. She married Joe DiMaggio in January 1954 and in San Francisco. And the big question was, where was she going on her honeymoon? And there were enough rumors going around that suggested, hey, she's going to come to the Monterey Peninsula for her honeymoon. But as it turns out, she and Joe did not come to the Monterey Peninsula. They drove down Highway 101 and they spent their first night or their first day or whatever at the Madonna Inn, which is right off Highway 101. I'm sure you've seen it before. While they were there, one of the guys that works at the hotel recognized Joe DiMaggio and said, "Hey, are you Joe DiMaggio?" And Joe says, "Yes." He said, "Oh, wow." And Joe said, please, do me a favor. Don't tell anybody." And so the guy did not tell anybody. The next day, Marilyn and Joe continued on, and down the coast they went. And I just wonder, in today's world, do you think that would be possible to happen where they could be twin? I don't think so. No. Okay, we're going to head across the street and we'll head back towards home.
How do you do, Robert?
I was sick last week, a couple of days.
This was the original Elks building in Salinas, and it was also the site of Logan's music store. I just want to mention a thing about that. But Jack Dempsey, the famous boxer, they used to have boxing matches upstairs here, and Jack Dempsey came. However, he didn't fight. He was here to referee a fight. And now on the ground floor this was Logan's music store. And again, we'll get back to John Steinbeck here. Steinbeck, in case you didn't know it, he played the piano from almost day one.
What?
He played the piano. And they had a piano there in the parlor there at the Steinbeck house that he played. And so he had a great interest in music, and his mother frequently took him and his sisters up to San Francisco to concerts and all that sort of stuff. Well, his best buddy, Max Wagner, who lived across the street from him, got a job one summer here at Logan's music store. This was about the time when record players, records were being marketed. And so John would frequently come down to visit his buddy Max and at the same time check out the music. What was interesting was he noticed the Logans had a son who was about 10 years old. And the son would be over there in the corner. Whenever John came, he noticed him. He'd always be over there in the corner. This kid, he had a rabbit. John would notice. He kept stroking the rabbit. Nice and bent. Sure. That's how he gets his ideas. So Logan's music store provides inspiration for at least part of Mice and Men. Okay, let's head on down now to the Fox Theater. This was built in 1921 when John Steinbeck was 19. You really can't see it, but it has a lot of what you would call Greek revival facade with columns and statuary and arches. Newspapers said this was the fanciest theater between San Francisco and Los Angeles. And you know, in the 1920s, theaters went out of their way. They became movie palaces, really. They weren't just theaters. They wanted to go out of their way to make them as luxurious as possible. They had an organ, and the organ here was supposed to be second to none. It was extremely high quality. This was a very, very popular place. Steinbeck's first commercially successful film, Mice and Men, was shown here in 1939. It starred Burgess Meredith and Lon Chaney. Today, it is being used by a local theater company for a variety of events, concerts, weddings, other fun events. This theater sat here totally neglected. It looked like it was ready to fall apart for at least 10 years or more before this company came in and rescued it. And much like the deal with the Dick Broom building versus the Taylor building, I'm hoping that the same thing will happen to the theater down on the next block, the old El Rey Theater, which in its day was a very, very good theater. But it has sat there neglected for at least 10 or 15 years, much like the Fox Theater did. And it would be wonderful if someone came along and could make a good use out of that. Pardon?
Earthquake retrofit, that's the issue.
That's the issue, okay. So you're talking a lot of money to put it back into operation. Yeah. Okay, so that's the story of the Fox Theater. Let's go down to the Odd Fellows Hall. Oh, and this is where Jesse Carr had his Okay, this is the Odd Fellows Hall, and the reason I just want to mention is it's just the site of it. I mentioned to you about Jesse Carr. Jesse Carr was the man who gave Salinas its first library. He donated $5,000 for the Carr Tower. He owned 48,000 acres of land out here in northeast Salinas, and that became a true Salinas landmark. We're going to head down now to the old Monterey County Bank. I'll mention a couple things because somebody asked a question about it, and then we'll look through the building. Okay, I just want to stop you. This is another bank with the Monterey County Bank, and if you remember a couple of items about this in East of Eden, if you read East of Eden, this was the bank where Kate would visit once a week, and she did not keep her money in a savings account. She kept her money in a safe deposit box. And she would deposit the money in the safe deposit box. There also was a office upstairs, and back in her earlier time, when she was not the madam, she was working for a madam. She would steal narcotics from the doctor's office when the doctor wasn't looking. So all of that happened in this bank. And then the other one is in East of Eden, when Cal Trask wants to compensate his father for the fact that he lost his shirt in the refrigerated car experiment. He went out, he invested his money into beans and made a fortune. I think he made $15,000. So he has all this money, and he requested that the money be in 1,000 crisp dollar bills. So that the money was transported from San Francisco down to this bank, and he was given an envelope with 15 $1,000 bills fresh out of the mint. So that's the story there. Yes?
There's somebody waving. I was waving back.
Oh, okay. The other thing is, I should mention that we were talking here. This business, Giorgio's, opened, about 3 years ago? This is owned by the same guy that owns the Broom building down on the corner that's got a big hole in it from a fire. And it probably took him, from the time that he purchased this building, it probably took him between 12 and 15 years to finally get his act together and open the business. And I can't say, I've eaten here a couple of times. The food's good. Service has been a little iffy, but I think probably, would you say it's been a success?
Yeah,
I think it has, and it's
a lot of people have eaten there.
yeah, and the food is very good. So he can do it, and we're just hoping now that he can do it down there at that corner one as well.
This place is after 5 o'clock there's nothing going on here.
Absolutely.
Now it's like,
and now there is something going on, and you don't have to feel that someone's going to stab you in the back while you're there. Let's just go kind of to the corner here. We want to take a look at the McDougal building from the east.
I really enjoyed going to that.
This building here sort of serves as the architectural gateway to Salinas. look, I think this building might be the most beautiful one along all of Main Street. And a lot of it, I think, was influenced a lot by the Greek and Roman architecture, and particularly the Beaux-Art period of the late 1800s. You've got a lot of rounded windows up there. You've got a lot of cornices that are common with the Roman architecture. And you've got all these little, if you look closely, all these little special decorations on it that give it a unique appearance. In those days, there was a real emphasis on having a good-looking building and having it architecturally beautiful. And I kind of liken it today. If you're looking around and you're thinking about doing business with somebody, you go on the internet, and I would expect most of us are influenced by the website that we visit. If it's a website where all the information on it is old and out of to date, and it doesn't provide you with any kind of insights or everything, you're probably not going to shop there. You're not going to do business there. Well, and you know, it's all about, part of it is about appearance. Same thing here. In those days, each of these buildings were owned by the people who actually had the business. So they had a real stake in it. And so they wanted to put their best foot forward architecturally. As far as the history of this building is concerned, this mostly, for the most part, it was a hardware store for a while, but for the most part it was restaurants and bars. And in my time of growing up, not a reputable place to be. There were some things going on down here that probably weren't very good. So, and that leads us, Roger and I were talking about it a minute ago, and that leads us as we're heading back into the 100 block of Main Street. The 100 block of Main Street when I was growing up was off limits. And not just for me, all my friends, their parents would not allow them to come down here because this was the seedy place of Salinas. It was dangerous, and all you get if you came down here was trouble. Obviously, the block has changed enormously in the last 20 or 25 years.
The 200 block was fine.
The 200 block was fine, yeah. Like the Fox Theater, we went to the Fox Theater all the time. I'm sure my mother probably banked at this building. I mean, yeah, there were no problems. This was almost like an invisible wall. Stay out of here. You don't want trouble. Okay, so we'll mention a couple places on this block. Okay, we'll stop here. This is the site of, well, originally this was Brown's Opera House, and it was built in 1915. John Steinbeck's graduation ceremony was held here. And Salinas had a population in those days of about 3,000 people. This opera house seated 850 people, which I think is quite large. Eventually, it changed into the Crystal Movie Theater, and it was pretty darn fancy. They had lots of decorative bands out here, a lot of Art Nouveau and all of that. Very, very popular place to be. And over the course of time, the Crystal Theater lost its luster, so to speak, and became very much a downtrodden place. And I tell people that there were 3 movie houses on Main Street in Salinas. We went to the Fox, and then there were 2 other ones down below. This one here was off limits. And my mother just gave the reason that you can't go to the Crystal Theater because they have fleas in the house. But, I mean, I don't think that was true. But it's funny, all my friends, their parents wouldn't let them go there too, and they all had different reasons. You know, it was like, well, there's a bunch of dangerous people down there, or, you know, this reason, the movies are not good to watch, and blah, 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 this. So I never went to the Crystal Theater, but it was a place for the downtrodden, so to speak, not a safe place at all. And when the Maya Cinema took over, and I'm going to guess, what, about 20 years ago they opened this building, and I think for those of us who lived on this block, it took a little while for us to adjust to the fact that this was an okay place to come to, because we had been so used to the fact that this was quite a dangerous place. So the Maya Theater was is one of the reasons that the 100 block of Main Street has enjoyed a true renaissance. Obviously, the most apparent is the Taylor Building, but that's only been here for a year. And you've got First Awakenings, and you've got the brewery here, and then you've got some of these smaller restaurants that are on this side of the street. They're very good. You've got the sports bar down on the corner, the Cliff Bar. And so the 100 block of Main Street now is an okay place to be for everybody, and that's refreshing. Not to mention the fact that there's the museum, the Steinbeck Center is there. That certainly was a big part of that as well. Grilled chickens. Yeah, there you go. Okay, a couple more quick stops as we head back to the museum. As you can see, the sign here says this is where John Steinbeck ate. On the other side it says Johnny ate here. And it's highly probable that he did. This was known as the Rodeo Cafe. It was a place where people gathered to eat. They had card rooms in the back, so a certain amount of gambling. Steinbeck lived only 2 blocks from here, so it's highly probable that when he would visit Salinas, he would come here and eat. It's now a Sank's Cafe, very popular.
Best greasy food there.
Yes, I agree. And boy, you know, you're looking to fill your stomach. You'll get it here. Okay, let's take a look. Let's take a look at these buildings right here. You're looking at the oldest buildings on Main Street. This is the Mayor Building and the Pia Building down on the left. In the mid-1890s, this whole block, which had wooden structures, a fire broke out, burned the whole darn block down. So the Salinas City Council passed an ordinance that said you have to build your buildings with brick. So the people that built these buildings, they use brick, but they use reinforced. They put reinforcements in it that would hold up during an earthquake. Also, the same was true of the McDougal building down on the corner. We had 3 buildings that were reinforced for earthquakes. So when the 1906 earthquake hit, all these other buildings suffered some, if not major damage. But not these buildings. They survived. And if you look at the one at the Pia building down there, they've got the date, 1894. That's when that building was built. And that represents that, and this one represents the oldest buildings on Main Street. The Pia building was a grocery store. Mrs. Steinbeck used to buy her groceries there, and she bought her meat at Mayer's. Mayer's was a butcher shop. The interesting thing about Mayer's was the butcher was a woman, and she was very successful. She lived upstairs for a while, and she was making so much money, she decided to get out, and she bought a nice house down on Central Avenue to join the rich crowd. That concludes the tour. And I think we're ending this at the exact right place, because you've got the oldest buildings on Main Street right here. You've got the newest building on Main Street right across the street, and I think the old and the new meld well together. And I think they give people in Salinas not only is they a source of pride, I think they give us hope for the future. And so we hold on to them dearly. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Check it out.